We're on. Hello, everybody. This is Jack Kelly of the Film Field. This is episode 2, and a pretty substantial one. We're going to be going over the trade deadline, a lot of big news to cover, more importantly, specifically the Jets, because this turned into something nobody really expected, right? Overall, if there was conversations about the trade deadline, it was Jermaine Johnson, it was Breece Hall. That was kind of the conversation, wondering if the Chiefs get into that mix for a running back, whatever happens with Jermaine Johnson at edge. That's where the focus seemed to be at. And none of that happened. None of that happened. Instead, we get Sauce Gardner to the Colts. And then right after that, we get Quinnen Williams to the Cowboys, which is monumental for a couple of reasons. And we're going to go into that for this video. First of all, I think the important thing to understand here is obviously philosophy, right? The Jets aren't idiots overall, as bad as they are, right? They understand what they're doing when they're trading away core players that they've built over the entirety of the 2020s. Quinnen Williams was 2019, but still, these are major players of their squad. They just extended Sauce Gardner. So obviously the first question is, why? This is a terrible trade. Why did you do this? But I think obviously plenty of angles to look at this from. I think the obvious thing here is talking about picks and value, right? And obviously here I think everyone can agree they got substantial value from what I would have previously assessed them to get. A move like Sauce Gardner to me seemed like a first-round pick and maybe some chump change. 2 first-round picks, one this year and one next year, is fantastic on its own. When you add on top of that the fact that they get A.D. Mitchell, I think that that's pretty substantial, and I'll go over as to why. The Jets' receiving core is completely pitiful. They are pathetic. Outside of Garrett Wilson, who I am an unbelievably massive fan of. For reference, I think Garrett Wilson's a top 10 wide receiver. I think he has been since he came into the league. I am unbelievably high on Garrett Wilson, so do not take me to be a Jets hater. I think he's unbelievable. It started off with having him as the core of your offense. Then you have Breece Hall at running back, right? You have good depth. You have Braylon Allen. Outside of that, there is no depth or value or volume here, right? Devontae Adams left, and that was a great pairing for last year, but that's gone now. You don't really have much outside of that. You have a few slot receivers I'm possibly interested in. That's about it. Overall, it's either you believe in young talent to develop and take over those core spots, which they didn't really do with Garrett Wilson out anyway, so there wasn't really much reason to believe that would change. It's either you thought that or you traded for some big star receiver. Now, I don't think A.D. Mitchell is a big star receiver, so they didn't choose that avenue. But what they did do is do what I wanted the Giants to do, which is find a problematic wide receiver who's young, year 2, year 3, and see if you can do anything to change their circumstances. I think to a lesser degree, the Eagles kind of had a version of this, right? Jahan Dotson not really working out, him getting traded over there. That's somewhat of a similar situation here, although I do think that A.D. Mitchell is more talented than a guy like Jahan Dotson. I think A.D. Mitchell is an elite separator. The problem is his hands. That's been the problem, right? Sometimes he can get shoved off of his routes, stuff like that. These were problems with him in college. These were problems that I had when it came to sometimes him being really slow in his tempo or sometimes really not being on the right pacing with the quarterback in terms of when he should be open. And there's multiple reasons for that. Texas had a weird offense, but then it followed him to the Colts. You could tell Shane Steichen would get frustrated sometimes with that kind of thing. So it made sense why they traded him, especially with the big dropping the ball before the goal line situation. But I think that A.D. Mitchell has tons of talent, and he's going to get a lot of opportunities with such a complete barren wasteland of a wide receiver room. So at very most, you're interested. It's the chump change of the overall trade. But if A.D. Mitchell works out at even the most average of his possible ceiling, which to me, that would just be being a pretty solid wide receiver 2, an average wide receiver 2. If he's on the level of Darius Slayton, that is a slam dunk on that trade for that player alone. That doesn't even include the first-round picks. And obviously, I think the bigger conversation here comes into, all right, sure, say whatever you want about what A.D. Mitchell can be. Maybe he's nothing, and he truly is just a bust. It's chump change, not really that much to worry about. But when you're looking at the actual trade package, the first-round picks, the biggest thing I've seen some people say is, well, how do you trust the Jets to draft well? I mean, aren't they trading away players they drafted just now? Yes, but I think that's different in this context. I think the context of them trading away these players is realizing that they weren't winning with these players because of coaching malpractice and a lack of actual valid quarterback play. That's the biggest reason here. Aaron Glenn is not doing a great job right now, whether or not you believe in him for the future. He's just not doing great right now. He's obviously not getting the most out of these defensive players, especially for a defensive coordinator who specializes in defensive backs. We had Sauce Gardner playing at a pretty high level this year, but it's not like he was doing anything outstanding with the rest of that core defense. So it wasn't like you could really put yourself on this pedestal of, wow, he's doing such an elite job with the defensive backs. No, they were playing about what they used to before he got there. So I think when it comes to the conversation of Aaron Glenn, I'm not particularly interested in hearing about a future there, but I'm not ruling him out. Regardless of that, they did not hold up their end of the bargain of making that defense at least somewhat interesting. That defense is not very good. So the context of knowing that and understanding that, hey, we have a coach who isn't really doing a great job, a free agency or trade for a quarterback that ultimately did not work, and it's a losing season and nothing's going on. We already have a bunch of defensive players who we're not getting the best out of. The ultimate decision you make there is, do you trade for future assets so that a new regime can come in here, or maybe it's still Aaron Glenn regardless, and reload and try to get this going again? Or do you just go with the same guys you're constantly re-signing and dragging along? It's not necessarily to say if they kept these players, it would have been a bad thing, but I understand the philosophy. I think the philosophy makes sense, especially because when you look at the context of how they've drafted, the entirety of the 2020s outside of Zach Wilson, I think they've drafted quite well. I think Mekhi Becton wasn't a great one, but it was fine in the moment. I could see what they tried to make work there. But after that, if you're talking about the past 2 years of taking great tackles, I think that's been a slam dunk. Elijah Vera Tucker was a good pick. I think that Garrett Wilson was, Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson, Will McDonald. All of these players are good players, and I think they were good picks for the Jets. So I believe in them to make the right decisions. I just hope they build the roster in a right way, knowing what they lost. Because you've lost a corner one, you've lost a phenomenal defensive tackle. If you find a way to make those position groups either sustainable or better, I don't think you're going to make it better. You traded some pretty great players. If you can make that sustainable, have an average solid D tackle take that lead, have a solid to average corner take that lead while maximizing the talent you're bringing to this team through the draft, which you absolutely can do now, that's a slam dunk to me. If they can go into the draft this year and maybe go for Fernando Mendoza or Ty Simpson at the top of the first round, and then pick a receiver or something of those likes, grab really good defensive talent in those later rounds, build around that core, come in for 2027 where they have 3 first-round picks, and just slam a home run on some of these generational prospects we're getting in 2027, we could be looking at a very different Jets team. And I think a few of the conversations I've heard about the future from other people have been, where do you start picking a quarterback if you're the Jets? Because now you have a few options, right? You could wait another year for prospects you might deem to be a little bit better because you have a lot of first-round picks. Or do you end up trying to pull the trigger this year because you're trying to build something a little bit quicker, and maybe getting the basis and foundation of that quarterback is important for next year so that they can look at everything outside the quarterback and value everything else on a much easier scale. When you have the quarterback, it's easier to look at the holes in your foundation and actually think correctly. I think the Giants are kind of in that mode right now. Kind of the Broncos, where they don't know if they really have their guy, but enough to be like, we can start looking at other positions, right? If the Jets could get into that mode, I can see a vision for that going, hey, we took Mendoza, we took Ty Simpson, we feel good. Let's say he has a pretty solid year. All right, 2027, what are we looking at? Receiver, Jeremiah Smith, Cam Coleman, Ryan Williams, Ryan Wingo. A lot of really good receivers in that draft. Very generational level draft in terms of receivers. That could be the case. They could be looking at quarterback for that next year. They could end up going, we want Julian Sand. We want to look at a Lagway, depending on what Lagway becomes. All that kind of stuff, right? I think that both of those philosophies make sense. For the Jets, more importantly, I think that they should hit the nail on the head of drafting a quarterback next year. Because if you're going to take a quarterback, I would rather that you get him in first, let Mendoza or Ty Simpson, who I think is absolutely worth taking high, a year to figure it out. I think that year 2 is the most important year for quarterbacks, because year 2 is where all these teams have tape on you. They all have seen the things that you've used in your system that helps you the best, and now you have to grow. You are forced to grow in year 2. You have to become something better, no matter where you're starting from. That's why we see so many sophomore slumps. Not because these guys are bad, but because the job gets so much harder. And I think that if that's the case, let's let that be the year that he gets some kind of generational player coming to his squad in 2027. If you're taking a Mendoza or Simpson in 2026, then you can be foaming at the mouth for a Jeremiah Smith or Cam Coleman in 2027. And after that, you've got 2 more picks to make even better picks out there for defensive talent and other things. And that's not even including the conversations we can have about them trading some of these picks for high-value players, right? I think they've put themselves in a nice, comfortable position to figure out what the future looks like. And I would say overall, in terms of drafting, I trust them. The overall vision of the future in terms of coaching staff, regime, QB, I'm not 100% sure, right? And that's okay for us to be at this point because this season was a blunder for the Jets. There's no reason to really be that excited. And I think you're looking towards the future to say, well, what does the vision of the future look like, right? Is it building something with Aaron Glenn? Is it moving on from Aaron Glenn? Is it moving on from this GM and this franchise's current regime? Is it seeing what they can do with picks and going for a quarterback this year? It's a lot of free reign. It's a lot of Wild West open land right now for them. And I trust them overall to pick good players. The turmoil becomes, do they have a direct vision? They took Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson, Garrett Wilson. They took Sauce Gardner. But there was no vision. They didn't make an aggressive push for a quarterback. And when they did, it was a bad quarterback in Zach Wilson. And then after that, it's been, let's trade for a guy. Let's trade for Aaron Rodgers. Let's trade for Justin Fields, right? And I'm not saying that's a bad philosophy, but that was like a vision of what they saw with their young players. Put a vet behind this. Put someone who's been around. I think that has to change. And if it doesn't, and they're like, wait, no, we can go get Kyler Murray, I think we're back in turmoil again. I think they need to grow up and draft a quarterback, especially because I think these next 2 drafts have quite a few guys you should be really interested in. So I'm curious to see how that's going to be handled. That's where we're at right now, which is, all right, your move, let's see what that offseason looks like, right? I think the Jets have basically fast-forwarded here from going from let's see what this season holds to who cares about this season at all, look towards 2026. And I think that's fine. I think that's where we're at with the Jets. And I think it's also very interesting and optimistic. I think as a Jets fan, you should be pretty optimistic. I think you should be pretty excited because if they can nail on the head these draft picks, which I honestly think they will, you're going to be very excited for the next couple of years. The problem is, what does that vision look like? Is it one that actually has real truth behind it? Is it one that feels planned with, hey, let's take a quarterback this year. Let's look at what we have for the offensive line. Line looks good. Let's make sure we can bring in a wide receiver too, right? Is it a planned philosophy or is it kind of just best player available and hoping they build something from that? Because to me, they failed at that early in the 2020s. You have a new chance to change that now. And I'm curious to see what that will ultimately be. If I had to guess, I see them picking a guy like Mendoza. I think that waiting too long could be bad, costly, especially for this regime if they stay. Do you really want to go through another year of saying, no, trust me, wait till we get a quarterback just for you to get fired? Probably not. You have the picks. You feel much more comfortable taking a quarterback knowing that you can also take somebody else in that first round. I think do it. That's where I land. But yeah, I think that's it for this video. I'm going to be going into the rest of the trade deadline as well and going into some other picks. I thought there was some interesting little under-the-radar stuff that people should talk about. One I'll be definitely making a video on is Shaheed to the Seahawks. I want to give that its own video because there's a lot to say about that and scheme fit and just generally how they will deploy Shaheed that I can't really just say right now. But I love that pick. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, I think that's it for now. I think Jets fans should be very excited. It's just a weird random explosion of this team and going for a completely different vision of the future than we thought. But we'll see, right? It depends on what those draft picks end up being. It's very much Wild West right now, like I said, but I think you should be optimistic. It's exciting at the very least. So yeah, that's it for now, guys. I appreciate you if you made it through the entire video. Please be on the lookout for more stuff coming tomorrow as well. Got a full video about Rashid Shaheed coming as well as a few other videos just on current mid-season form of a lot of these teams, both playoff contenders and also just the mediocre middle of the ground packed. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one. See you guys.